Hey, welcome. When it comes to photography, one of my favorite times of the day to shoot is at night or at blue hour just after sunset, or also right before sunrise. These are times when it's very dark out and it's almost nighttime, but even into the nighttime as well, there's some great photo opportunities, and today I'm going to be taking you through some tips and my instructions on how you can get the best nighttime photos. Let's get into it. I'll start with some of the differences between daytime and the nighttime. First of all, there's less light available during the night. That's pretty obvious. But one of the bigger factors you're going to notice is that because the sun is down, you're going to have to pay attention to your light sources a little bit more. Because the light is a little bit more limited, you're going to have to pay attention to which spots are actually getting that light. So for example, a street lamp is only going to be illuminating that certain spot around it, whereas the sun just kind of covers everything during the day. That the only real comparable light source during the nighttime is the moon, and that's not going to be nearly as bright, so you're going to have to pay attention to your light sources, because there generally is just less light available unless you're nearby street lamps, like I said, because the moon is otherwise your only source. Another example of this would just be nearby windows of any building that has their lights on still, because that light's going to spill out of those windows and cover everything outside. Another example from the photo you can see on the screen here is a firework. That's going to be a good light source. That's a common photo setting where you're going to be in the dark, and it's going to be something you're going to want to take photos of, but it's going to be very dark out, and that is the light source that you're going to be shooting with. Now in this photo, it wasn't too far after sunset, so there was still some light in the sky compared to the silhouette in the foreground. I did have a little bit of an advantage there. That's going to be that blue hour that I was talking about earlier. Because blue hour is not quite nighttime. It's not quite as dark. That's going to be just after sunset and just before sunrise. It's going to be a lot lighter out then, and that would be an ideal time for nighttime photography if you don't want it to be too dark out or too late in the night or too early in the morning. Because not everyone wants to go out and shoot photos at 12 o'clock midnight. So when it comes to settings and gear, it is going to differ from the daytime, and one of the biggest changes you're going to notice, you're going to need a tripod. That is almost for certain because it's just so dark outside that you can't gather enough light without leaving that shutter open for 10 to 30 seconds sometimes, especially if the moon is your light source you're using. So if you're not familiar with manual mode and your three basic settings that make up the exposure triangle, or if this is your first time encountering manual settings, I would definitely go check out a different video. This is not where I'm going to fully explain this. One of the settings you're going to want to figure out is going to be manual focus, because autofocus is going to have a harder time working depending on how dark it is. If you're focusing on a spot that's well lit by a street lamp, you'll probably have no problem, but if you're going to be shooting where the moon is your only light source, even at a full moon, you're going to have a hard time using autofocus. So you're going to want to figure out your manual focus so you can set your lens to a distance marking, but that way you know where it's focusing and you know you haven't missed focus. And you can check this by magnifying the image after taking a test shot. Oh, one more thing for settings, make sure you have a self timer turned on your camera if you're using a tripod, because this way you can press the shutter and it delays the actual taking of the photo by a couple of seconds. It can be 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever. Next up, I'm going to take you out into the field and I'm going to walk you through some of the steps that I would go through when I'm taking these nighttime photos. And that way we can put into practice everything I've talked about so far. So for this next shot, I'm set up here to take a photo of the street lamp, and I really like the blue kind of handicapped painted part in the parking lot, as well as all of these posts that kind of reserve all the parking spots. Earlier I was talking about your light sources, and here, if you want to identify the light sources, it's going to be primarily the street lamp here. That is the dominant light source. But there's also plenty of other light coming from numerous other lights around, street lights around me, that you might not necessarily see in the photo, but they're still casting light into it. So there's one just out of frame over here, and that one is also casting a lot of light to help fill in the shadows on the brick walls. Another light source you're going to notice is just these windows here. They're going to be spilling out some light into the photo as well, so that's something to pay attention to. When you're exposing your image, you might want to expose for the windows, the street lamp, or maybe the shadows in the brick wall. It all depends on the shot. So you could expose one shot for the highlights, which would be your brightest part, so that you retain all of the detail there. And then later you also take a photo that exposes for the darker parts, which might be the front faces of these posts here, because they're not getting hit by a lot of light. So they might end up as silhouettes, and I might not want that a ton. So you can take those two photos and blend them together, and it gives you a little bit more to work with in post. And then again, that's when you're editing the photo, and we can worry about that later. Getting those 2 exposures will capture as much information and detail as possible in camera. That way you can take as long as you want to figure out what you want to do later. That's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something. If you did, then please leave a like down below, as it supports the channel and I'd really appreciate it. Now good luck with your nighttime shooting, and have a great rest of your day.